This morning we're continuing our study in the book of Mark, but kind of tie that into how we celebrate Christmas as well. And we're going to be thinking of this morning the greatest questions, the greatest question that can be asked. Punctuation is very important in language. One teacher stood before the classroom and wrote a sentence on the board and asked the students to punctuate it. This is the sentence that the teacher wrote on the board, and the words are just simply this: a woman without her man is nothing, and asked the students to punctuate it. So the men in the classroom punctuated it in this way: a woman without her man is nothing. And the women in the classroom punctuated it correctly and said, a woman without her man is nothing. Now, all the smart husbands in here would agree with me. That's the way you're supposed to punctuate that sentence. Men, you blew it. Supposed to say amen at that point, okay? Punctuation is important. We have three terminal punctuation marks. We have a period, which is the end of a declarative statement. We have exclamation mark, that is to be able to express strong emotion. Then a question that marks end of an interrogative statement that you make. And in Spanish, many times you'll see written Spanish, they'll have an inverted exclamation point or an inverted question mark at the beginning of the sentence. I think that's good because a lot of times in English, we don't know the inflection of our voice and if it's a question until we get to the end of the sentence, so that helps. There's all sorts of questions. If you have an iPhone, I don't normally bring my iPhone to the pulpit. Some of that's because I'm scared Red Ray will pull a prank and call me during the sermon. But if you have an iPhone, you have a feature on there that's Siri. And you can ask all sort of questions. Hey, Siri.
There's no need for that.
Hey, Siri.
Hi there, Bro D.
She calls me Bro D. What is 0 divided by 0?
Imagine that you have 0 cookies, and you split them evenly among 0 friends. How many cookies does each person get? C. It doesn't make sense. And Cookie Monster is sad that there are no cookies. And you are sad that you have no friends.
Let me turn that off in case Michelle calls about that resort vacation I keep winning every week. So that's just a lot of fun. We have a lot of questions about life. Some questions that are just insignificant questions. I heard a survey over the last few weeks just how much time Americans spend trying to decide what they're going to have for supper. And they hand you a menu when you go out to a restaurant and you look at it and everything either looks good or you wait to hear what somebody else is going to order and oh, that sounds good. I didn't grow up with that decision. We ate what Mama put on the table and we were thankful for it, except for liver. Other than that, there are other questions. There are questions that are pressing questions. And the question that we're going to consider this morning is a pressing question. The first recorded words of Satan in the Bible is a question. Genesis 3, where he questions the integrity of God. Did God really tell you that you couldn't eat of every tree in the garden? First question that God asked in the Bible is to Adam. Adam, where are you? God wasn't looking for information. He was wanting Adam to recognize where he was and to admit that. There's some questions. The first question in the New Testament is a question associated with Christmas. Matthew records that for us in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 2. Verse 1 says, Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came Magi, wise men from the east to Jerusalem, asking this question, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? But the most important question that is asked in this life is a question that we find in our study in the book of Mark today. Mark chapter 15, we're in the next to last chapter, Mark 15. This is after Jesus out of the Garden of Gethsemane has been arrested, carried before the Sanhedrin, and now then in Mark 15 and verse 1. Early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders and scribes and the whole council immediately held a consultation, and binding Jesus, they led him away and delivered him to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? And he answered, It is as you say. And the chief priests began to accuse him harshly. Then Pilate questioned him again, saying, Do you not answer? See how many charges they bring against you. But Jesus made no further answer. So Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner whom they requested. The man named Barabbas had been in prison with insurrectionists who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the crowd went up and began asking him to do as he had been accustomed to do for them. And Pilate answered them and said, Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? And he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of their envy. And the chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. And so answering again, Pilate said to them, What shall I do with him whom you call the king of the Jews? And they shouted back, Crucify him. But Pilate said to them, Why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, Crucify him. Wishing to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers took him away into the palace, that is, in the praetorium, and they called together the whole Roman cohort, and they dressed him in purple, and after twisting a crown of thorns, they put it on him, and they began to acclaim him, Hail, King of the Jews! And they kept beating his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling and bowing before him. And after they had mocked him, they took the purple robe off him and put his own garment on him, and they led him out to be crucified. Matthew's gospel clarifies the question that is so important even more. Matthew chapter 27 and verse 22, Pilate said to them, What shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? Now, we have insignificant questions. We have important questions. But this is the most important question about your life and your destiny. What shall I do with Jesus? Notice that it is not a question that's plural. It's not what shall we do, it is personal. What shall I do with Jesus? And it is a question, though there are a lot of important questions, it is the most important question. It is the most pressing question this morning. What shall I do with Jesus? More important than where you're going to go to school, more important than what job you're going to have, more important than who you're going to marry, what will I do with Jesus? And so this morning, as we think about the Bible presenting these pressing questions, you think about whenever God asked that of Adam, where are you? For him to recognize this was an answer that was pressing him for the rest of his life and for destiny. Whenever Moses stood poised with the second generation of Israelites about to go into the promised land, he asked them a question in Deuteronomy 30 and verse 15. See, I set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. Verse 19, he says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live. It's that kind of important question, a question that you have to look at before you can move on and know what your destiny is going to be. A few years later, Joshua stands there after they had conquered most of the promised land. He asks the same question over in Joshua 24 and verse 15. And if it seem evil to you today to serve the Lord, choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The pressing question today that you have to decide before you can move into any promised land, before you can make any other decision, is the question that decides your destiny. What will I do with Jesus? And this Christmas, I want you to just take the story from the book of Mark and see how this is the question of Christmas. What shall I do with Jesus? Now, you can try to answer that like Pilate did. You can try not to reject him, or you can choose to receive him. But Pilate didn't want to make that decision. The point that I'm making this morning is that you cannot deny the decision came back to Pilate. Pilate was the one that decided that. We know a lot about Pilate. We know that he was the fifth prefect that ruled over the Roman province of Judea. We know that he served under Caesar Tiberius from 26 AD to 36 AD. We know that he had the authority. He had the legal and he had the military force and the authority to set Jesus free. Luke's gospel tells us that he went back to the people, to the Sanhedrin, 3 different times and tried to persuade them that he had done nothing wrong. Why would they want him to send Jesus to the cross? John gives us the account where they fired back at him and hit him in his soft spot when they said, if you release him, you are no friend of Caesar's. We know, according to Matthew's account, that his wife, Pilate's wife, came to him and said, I've had dreams, I've had nightmares, don't have anything to do with this. But he comes to that point where he's trying to pass the buck and he's trying to compromise. And that is what a lot of people are trying to do in their life, to not make a decision for Jesus. And here's the harsh truth. Some people don't want to upset anybody else, so they just don't want to make a decision about Jesus. Or they compromise how they feel about Jesus, and they don't really make it known how they feel about Jesus. Or they just simply don't want to deal with it. They just don't want to think about it. And Christmas rolls around, and we love to think about the miracle in the manger, but we've sang it all through this morning, and we will again tonight. It is not just about Bethlehem. It does not end after Bethlehem. Bethlehem happened so that Calvary could happen. Jesus was born for a purpose, and that was that he would live a perfect life and go to the cross to die a vicarious death and offer salvation for us. You cannot just end the story in the manger. And Pilate had to come to that point where he tried in every way that he could not to deal with it, but you cannot wash your hands of this question. What will you do with Jesus? Now, Pilate tried to kick it on down the road. So we have, according to the book of Luke, that Herod was in town. And so he sent Jesus, finding out that he was from Galilee, from Herod's place where he reigned, sent him over to Herod. Now, we know who Herod was. And Herod, and many people, this is how at Christmas they respond to Jesus. They just want to adore him. Herod was excited. He wanted to see Jesus. Luke chapter 23 and verse 8 says, now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he had wanted to see him for a long time, because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign before performed by him. Herod represents those kind of people who want to talk about Jesus as long as it's about what they can get out of Jesus. That's what they want to adore Jesus as long as it's about what they can get out of Jesus. They want to talk about Jesus, but when it's convenient for them. It's kind of like your Christmas decorations. Now, some people are very talented. We've got a young man who is so talented that he got to go to the White House and decorate at the White House this year. Scott, they told me you decorated the blue room. Is that right? I thought that was the room everybody went to when they were depressed. It was the blue room. And Scott, they're going to interview. It's going to be on HGTV, but he won't get to see it tonight because he's going to be here singing in the cantata. But we're going to all DVR it, and I'm going to edit it. I'm not. I'm just kidding. But a lot of people, they enjoy Christmas decorations. And some folks are really talented. We don't do a whole lot of decoration around my house. But I did put up the tree, and Leanne was putting ornaments on yesterday. Because of our family situation, we've got some ornaments that have been in the family a long time. They have some sentimental value, so we got 4 little ones. So she put those on the other side of the tree up way high. But that's kind of, we all like that, but what's going to happen here in just a few weeks? You're going to take those ornaments down, you're going to put them back in a box, and you're going to put them in a safe place. That's the way a lot of people want to treat Jesus. They just want to take him out on certain occasions, dust him off, shine a little light on him, enjoy him for a season. But when it's inconvenient for them to deal with the question about what are you going to eternally do with Jesus and how Jesus determines your destiny, they want to fold him back up, put him in a box, and put him away. They want to be like Herod. They just want to adore him, but it's just what they can get out of it. So he sends him back to Pilate. Richard Dawkins is he's a brilliant man, brilliant mind, but he's probably the leading voice for atheists of our day and time. He wrote the book, The God Delusion. But Richard Dawkins, atheist, says that he admires Jesus because he was a great moral teacher. Well, I'm here to tell you this Christmas, you cannot just admire Jesus. Another Oxford professor, one of the greatest minds of the age, C.S. Lewis, this is what he said. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else he was a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him, you can kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let no one come with a patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He hasn't left that open to us. He did not intend to. This Christmas, you can try to be like Pilate and just not deal with it and wash your hands and send it on down just to deal with it like Herod. Try to adore it, but it wound up back in the decision, wound up back with Pilate. And so sometimes we want to do a third response. This is what the world wants us to do, and it's what the mob did. What the mob wanted to do was just to replace Jesus. It was their custom, Pilate's custom, to be able to commute the sentence of somebody, one of the Jewish people at Passover. And so Pilate thought, here's a loophole that I don't have to deal with it. I can wash my hand. I can set him free. They can't say that I'm doing it because I'm not a friend of Caesar. I take that away. And he wanted the people to say, well, give us Jesus, King of the Jews. He had been so popular. Everybody wanted to be around him. But the religious leaders got him stirred up. Matthew 27 and verse 20, it says, but the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and put Jesus to death. What Pilate wanted to do, and then the mob turned on him, and the mob wanted to replace Jesus. That is the climate that we live in right now. The world doesn't mind if we celebrate Christmas, just as long as we don't put Jesus in it. There is an aggressive move that has been going on, not to say Merry Christmas, but to say Happy Holidays. Oh, we don't want to offend anybody. Well, I'm sorry. That's what Christmas is about. It is about Jesus. It's about the birth of Jesus. That's why we celebrate. And for us to do anything less than that, then we're not any better than this mob saying, well, we just won't deal with it. We'll just make a compromise on it. It doesn't mean that we have to be offensive, but it means that we stand upon what we believe, that we believe that Jesus is the reason for Christmas. And that's why we celebrate Christmas. As we do that, it presses the question back to us, what shall I do with Jesus? And so we're back in the hands of Pilate, and I don't care how long he washed his hands. The decision was Pilate's. And today the decision is yours. What will you do with Jesus? A lot of questions that are asked in the Bible, and they all come back and they all depend upon how you answer that question. Job asked the question, if a man dies, shall he live again? Well, that depends on what shall I do with Jesus. The Bible asks the question, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? That is dependent upon how you answer the question of what you do with Jesus. Whenever Paul says, if God be for us, then who can be against us? That depends on how you answer the question about Jesus. The Bible tells us in Hebrews, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? That depends on what you do with the question about Jesus. Sometimes, and I'm going to go back to punctuation. Sometimes whenever we come to declare a sentence, we end it, and just to put an end to it, sometimes we will even say the punctuation. Like we will say, well, and that's the end of the matter, period. This morning, I want you to respond, okay? So wake up, I want you to respond verbally. Whenever you see it, you'll know what to say. When the question is asked, what must I do to be saved? Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved. Period. How can I get to heaven? And Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Period. How can I be saved? There's no other name given among men whereby we must be saved. Period. Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. Period. It's what you do with Jesus. As we stand here looking ahead to Christmas, what a wonderful Christmas it can be if you know the one in the manger is the one who was on the cross and the one who came out of the tomb and the one who comes today and the Holy Spirit presents him and asks the question, what will I do with Jesus? Let's pray.